My plan had worked. Word reached me that someone who could help us would contact us soon, with open ears and experience. We'd follow her siren song as soon as we wrapped up with the New York World's Fair, which seemed to be a few states out of place. I wanted to see this whole ordeal through, but Matt was eager to get to our specialist. I think he was trying to get my mind off of the disappointment I was feeling by distracting me with something that was still the same, even today. The very model of storybook romance. Lois and Clark. Hi, I'm John.
And I'm not so John.
Why would you do that to me?
For exactly that reason.
And we're the DC Detectives.
It's our job to go back through the annals of DC history and chronicle the evolution of all your heroes from start
to every reversible finish. Today we're starting with the New York World's Fair comic. It's 96 pages from June 1939. You're correct. I think this
96?
is...
96? Okay, so it's an issue and a half.
Right there, 96 pages.
Yeah.
Full color. But you're right. I think this is a special kind of book purely because you just mentioned that action usually has stories of certain characters that are just, interspersed as chapters. I think this is similar. It's just, you think the difference is that every character is at the World's Fair.
My guess is that this was either given away or, I guess, 25 cents. It must have been sold specifically as either New York World's Fair Special Edition or... it was sold specifically on site, something along those lines.
Which, that's kind of neat. That it's a thing-specific situation. Mm-hmm. On the cover, it's got a bunch of, kind of Art Deco sort of stuff going on and a couple characters.
Specifically, those are actually the three major emblems, or signature pieces, I suppose, of the World's Fair. It's the Triosphere, the Perisphere, the Trillion. I don't know.
That's all you, man. I don't know that's all you, man. I don't know anything about that. But on the right-hand side of the cover, you have Superman, Zatara, Butch the Pup, the Sandman, and Ginger Snap. And 3 Leaguers on the front there. Those are 3 JSA members.
What color is Superman's hair?
Superman is blonde. That's weird.
Yep.
And we're going to just forget that that's happening.
Yep.
But that's interesting that there are 3 Justice Society members. At any rate, it starts off with Clark waiting to hear who's going to be nominated for a certain position. And him and the rest of the reporters are getting stonewalled. Clark says, well, this is stupid, and dresses up like Superman, jumps up several stories, and listens in on the conversation outside, and finds out who's going to be nominated for this thing, runs back to his editor and tells them, hey, it's this guy, and they get the scoop. That's literally all this is. It's a page and a half of an extraneous storyline. Just to remember, guys, if you've never been reading Action Comics, and you're at the World's Fair and you have no idea who Superman is, he has a guy in red and blue pajamas with the yellow S on his chest, and he's a reporter. And he sometimes uses his really awesome abilities to snipe scoops from other hardworking natural people. What a jerk.
I kind of want to talk about the way, later on, not in the middle of this one, but the way that the storytelling in these issues just bugs me.
It's
the
so
story
slapdash.
Structure.
It's so slapdash.
I don't even know if I can call it that. It's just, I know it's not my style, and it annoys me. Anyways, that's later.
We get to Clark back in the Daily Star offices, and he's being told that he has an assignment. He's to go with Lois Lane to the World's Fair and report on the World's Fair. That's kind of a big deal. I'm sure he's actually very excited about that. He goes and tells Lois. He says, I'm to accompany you. They get on the train, and they head off. Later, we see that while they are on the train, a guy is running up to someone at the train station going, there's a problem. You gotta stop the train. And, of course, the trains are going to crash. They're on the same track. Clark sees this, and being Superman, jumps out in front of the train, stops them both, and then runs back inside so that Lois doesn't see that he's Superman. He didn't even change. He just jumps out as Clark Kent.
Which is actually highly entertaining. You made an excellent point earlier.
Yeah, it's really weird that... We'll get to that point later, but I find it strange that, this is something he doesn't have time to change for? The guy that moves at like 10,000 miles an hour that we clocked or something, can't change to be Superman right here and then stop the trains and then change back and then get back in the car? That's too quick for him?
To be fair, maybe this nice dress suit isn't made out of unstable molecules.
That's true. He needs to contact Reed Richards. I just think it's funny that these trains are really only moving at, I want to say, 50 plus miles an hour. They're not going like 80 miles an hour. These are
even if they are, that's relatively minor amount of momentum for Superman.
He's run faster than a bullet at this point. I'm just surprised that he doesn't change. When he just changed to jump and hang on to a building and listen in on a conversation, he doesn't think that he should change for this. At any rate, he saves the train. They get to the World's Fair. Lois and him kind of disappear from each other's sight. So he goes off to do something, and he hears of a man trying to construct this sculpture for the World's Fair, and it's just not done. Like, the ground hasn't even been broken yet. None of the stuff's been put up, and he's in a rush, and he's frustrated that this hasn't been taken care of. What is the exhibit about?
Infantile paralysis.
Yeah, we were both really concerned. So this was going to be a statue or vials full of dead babies that have infant paralysis, and we were like, wow, that's really dark.
Well, so I actually wound up doing some research today in preparation, because we initially read all of this for the forthcoming discussion roundtable, I guess is the way of discussing it, with Arden Leigh,
which is in this episode. Mm-hmm. So it's at the end of this episode. So
stay tuned, because that's a really good discussion, and she really knows her stuff. But as a result, like, we did this initial read, now I've actually gone back through and taken closer notes. Infantile paralysis is polio.
Okay.
Which makes way more sense.
Not as scary as we thought it was. No. Still a terrible thing.
It's a terrifying name. Still a terrible
thing.
But
not what we thought it was going to be. So yeah. We got a little ahead of ourselves. I was using my imagination and everything got really intense. So Superman hears that this man is having trouble with his infantile paralysis syndrome display and jumps into action because he's a good guy when he wants to be.
He's always trying to be.
He's 90% of the good of right intention, 50% having good repercussions of his actions.
He gets like a C+.
Yeah, Superman's a C+ superhero at this point. So Superman goes and basically constructs this entire exhibit and statue and everything himself, so this guy can have his thing. Which is really nice of him, because that's a completely generous act that has no bad repercussions for once. Well done. Oh, I guess saving the train didn't hurt anybody. He actually saved the train without wrecking either train or hurting anybody in the process.
Really, it feels
he's like 2 for 2.
It feels like as Superman with superheroic actions, his issues are always in the final act of the story.
Yes.
By the way, let me knock down this entire slum city.
Exactly. So he's about 2 for 2, unless you say 2 for 3, in which he uses his powers to eavesdrop and get the leg up against his quote-unquote peers in the reportering industry, which I don't think he's got any with his super hearing and flying abilities. At any rate, Superman is now looking for Lois and trying to find her. Sees her, jumps back down, changes into Clark Kent as they're going to the Marine Transportation Building, which would be actually kind of interesting. Boats and submarines, I would imagine.
Can we hop back really quickly?
Mm-hmm.
So here, he specifically notices, he jumps up onto essentially an obelisk, one of the statue pieces of the World's Fair, and he uses, quote, supervision to find her. This is, the first time I think we've seen supervision, like he's used X-ray vision. I don't think he's used long distance sight.
Does it say that he does? I'm looking at this right here. It just says his peering keenly.
The supervision of the Man of Steel quickly locates Lois.
Oh, so there we go. We get another...
Well, there's the question. Is it a superpower? Or is it referring to him just locating her?
They have generally said super space something when it's a power. I'm going to say that this is just him being a guardian and supervising her.
Okay.
So I'm not going to give you that one. But however, I think that is a good example or a good case for him having another power. He notices her, he gets down to her, they go to the Marine Transportation Building. On their way in, they get bumped into by a rough type. Nick Stone, Lois identifies him as. Clark gets clocked by this guy, and he says, I'll play unconscious and see what happens. Another one for Clark, purposefully endangering Lois to see where this goes.
Yeah.
Nick Stone begins to escort Lois away from the World's Fair into a car and a cab. Clark, of course, follows now, and Superman goes to Nick Stone's hideout, where he says, how did you recognize me, to Lois? And Lois just says, you're a wanted criminal. I'm a reporter. I should know what you look like.
By the way, I'm good at my job.
Yeah.
I may not be willing to throw a punch, which is unfortunate. There's a specific bit when she is getting accosted, or rather when she calls out Nick Stone, she says, hey, Clark, punch his ass.
Grab him, yeah. She tells Clark to act. So she has the wherewithal to think that action should be done. She just doesn't think that she should be doing it.
And I think this is specifically an instance of the character of Lois running into the writing willingness of the writers.
The gendered writing bias. Which is... Hey,
modern Lois would have thrown a punch or grabbed a taser.
Absolutely.
So I'll give her...
Or at least followed him.
Can we give her half credit for a punch?
Yeah, sure. I'll give her half credit.
Excellent.
Clark follows them back to Nick Stone's hideout. Nick Stone is about to kill Lois. He's about to shoot her. This is the equation we ran to figure out how fast Superman is running, where he's about 3 feet away from Lois. He pulls a gun on her. Clark jumps through a window and races about 15 feet to catch the bullet halfway between Lois and the guy. So he runs 15 feet while the bullet is 1.5 feet away from Lois Lane. If you want to do the math yourself and want to well actually us, please do if you're a better mathematician than both of us. I guarantee you're a better mathematician than me. I am not good with numbers. There is a reason I misuse them. Matt is far better than I am. Matt did the equation. We think it's around 10,000 feet or miles an hour.
I think that was what we came up with, roughly.
So, if you want to actually do the math and tell us, the trajectory of, of man 15 feet away hitting something 1.5 feet between two objects standing 3 feet away, please do. And one of them is traveling at whatever the speed of a bullet travels at. Please do that, and we would love to hear from you if you were... We will give you ups, big ups for that.
Specifically a 1930s handgun.
Yes, I want to say probably a 1911 Colt. If you want to go for a generic gun that probably people had, go with a 1911 Colt firearm. It's probably the easiest. It's probably the one that they drew the most. I'm going to say that's probably what it is. Superman catches the bullet, just wrecks these guys, as Superman would in an open fight between 3 thugs and Superman. Carries Lois away. He's about jumping around. While they're jumping around, back to the World's Fair, we see 2 men discussing that they're about to steal some jewels at an exhibit.
It's specifically the group that they busted up had made plans. Oh, you're investigating us. What we're actually going to do is we're going to steal these jewels. And why are you telling me this, says Lois? Because you'll never tell anyone.
Of course. The old villain hubris trick.
Yeah.
They're jumping back to the World's Fair, of course, now to stop these 2 men who are going to still try and go through with the plan of stealing these jewels. Meanwhile, there's a ginormous and lovely fireworks display happening that seems extremely like a fire hazard with how many fireworks are going off.
Well,
for 1930s.
Yeah. It was in Queens, I think.
Okay, that's fair.
I actually don't know. I assume that's an area that is more space instead of being so tightly compacted.
If you're a World's Fair aficionado, please let us know where the 1939 World's Fair happened.
Also, can we talk about this cop? This cop gets shot and then is still on the ground shooting.
That guy's hardcore.
Yeah.
While Superman is jumping through the fireworks, they land and they notice the cop still firing bravely from a prone position. The bad guys are getting away in their car. Of course, that's not a problem for Superman. He just runs and tips the car over, beats the crap out of them, and then brings them back to the cop.
By the way, never try to escape in a car from Superman.
Yeah, because he'll just lift it or probably break it and kill you in it, because he's done that several times. Somewhere else, at the World's Fair, nearby, a parachute jumper is getting ready to do his bit, because I just want to point out, you're probably doing a fireworks display at night. Mm-hmm. It's not very night in this next picture, but there's a parachute jumper, and I just want to say that you're probably doing parachute jumping as an attraction during the day. Yeah. This is a stupid idea of doing parachute jumping at a similar time that a firework thing is happening, especially just for the off chance that some firework goes off and goes straight for this dude. They're not in the same area, but just as a safety precaution, someone who would think about that, I would say we probably shouldn't have the parachute jumper happening at night at the same time as our fireworks display.
It's even better. I'm not sure, but that is probably a reference to the, it's like Sky High. I don't remember the name of the exact attraction. But that was something that normal civilians would go on as like a ride, an attraction.
Oh, that's not okay.
Yeah. And the best part is, the parachute doesn't open. In a comic that is meant to be an advertisement for the New York World's Fair.
There's a lot of crap happening at the World's Fair that is very dangerous and very questionable.
But this one is specifically, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm on an attraction. I'm going to die. Except for superhero.
The parachute just doesn't open. Yeah. So what? We have a wanted criminal planning a jewel heist at the World's Fair. We have an entire exhibit not having been built, and a guy having a defective parachute for the World's Fair is a shitty place. There's some bad stuff happening there, and it's either poorly managed or it's like Knott's Berry Farm on a Monday. Just nothing's happening the way you want it to be. So, you've got this guy jumping presumably through tons of black powder smoke because the fireworks display happened nearby, and that's just also a terrible idea, jumping through low-hanging smoke. Falling because the parachute hasn't opened. Superman has to go, oh crap, another thing. Races off, and one hand underhand catches this guy. I think he should. Again, I am going to make this argument like I did last time with the guy that he threw up in the air in the circus that he caught one-handed. If we were having that conversation about the elephant and the square area of pounds that are being put on that small area on an elephant's stomach, we should be having the same conversation about Superman underarm catching a guy and his lower back.
I think you're right in that is the exact same kind of thing, but I still think that
Superman
he has been
logic.
shown... Yeah, exactly that.
Superman logic, and I totally agree, but I think in any situation now, especially in the era post-Gwen Stacy, this would have killed him.
Yeah.
This would have killed this poor man. Just gonna say that.
Public safety announcement. If you ever get superpowers, please remember, learn how physics work.
For those of you who live in a post-Gwen Stacy epoch, please remember, use both hands when catching falling victims, and never try to do it at a dead stop. Try to slow their descent first. If you're in 1930s time, and you're listening to this by some miracle of time-traveling technology, catch them however the fuck you want. Nobody seems to care. So, we're coming now to the end of this issue here, where Lois, seeing Superman doing this, jumps to him and clambers on him to be like, my hero! And he's like, bitch, get off me. And causes him to... I think he, tries to violently somersault through the air to shake her off. And she's still holding on.
I don't think it's that. I think it's similar to what we saw in one of the previous issues with all of the street kids. It's let me just jump around until you guys are sick, and then you won't want to hang out anymore.
In an effort to frighten Lois away, Superman somersaults violently through the air.
Yeah, I don't think he's trying to throw her off. I think he's trying to get her to be ready to vomit, and when she's at that point, he'll just drop her, or put her down, and then run.
Because the panel before, Lois is jumping into his arms or around his neck, and he says, Lois, and she says, you'd be surprised how hard it is to get rid of me. That's a needy person. Clark and Lois, or rather Superman and Lois, are having this conversation where she's... saying that was fun, of course. Every innocent person is never scared by Superman's jumping.
That's because they're all light as a feather with their hearts.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah. They're lighthearted individuals. They fly with the angels.
That's some Tinkerbell stuff right there. Superman jumps off when Lois kisses him. He changes back into Clark. Lois is like, whatever, you're not Superman. They go back home. A lot of good World's Fair stuff for the editor at the end. I'm going to say... this is an issue that is purely the greatest hits of Superman if you haven't been reading Action Comics. Superman does literally everything he does in a lot of the Superman issues prior to this in Action Comics, aside from be in the circus and play football, that he would do on a issue-to-issue basis. And this is a great advertisement for Superman, showing, look at all these amazing things that this guy does. And look, there's a girl who loves him, but she doesn't like Clark Kent. Ooh, there's some dichotomy there that we don't know about. This is a good advertisement. It's just hilarious that they fill, 12 pages with just this cacophony of nonsense that Superman has to deal with in, a 12-hour period.
In that sense, it's actually very similar to the circus issue.
Yeah.
Where it's just, hey, a bunch of things are going on. And in that case, it was all tied together by, hey, this threat of these mobsters. But in this, it's just a bunch. It's the shotgun approach to superhero stories.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. This is an advertisement of superhero stories.
This is the mid-90s movie adaptation novel.
Yes. Or I was going to say this is just an amateur attempt at writing Superman. Almost like another team was given him to write him for a thing. But it is single issue stuff.
Bad. It's not bad. It's crammed in there.
It just feels rushed.
Yeah. One thing I do want to go over really quick. Superman nicknames. So this is actually the first time that we see this very last panel. Is the first time we see the name the Man of Tomorrow. At least in this comic. I did a flip through, so I apologize if I missed anything, but I actually did go through every page looking for points where there are no points before this where he's called the Man of Tomorrow.
Much like Batman is not called the Dark Knight.
Yeah. Or the Caped Crusader. That's the thing. The nicknames don't come out until suddenly they do, and they keep getting used. You will see Man of Tomorrow later in future issues, but it's worth noting, and other people have made this connection as well, but the New York World's Fair, its motto was the World of Tomorrow. So it's like, okay, interesting, I guess that stuck well. The other one that's interesting is Man of Steel. We first see on page 70 of this, and it's actually...
of the volume.
Yep.
We're talking about, not 70 of the World's Fair comic. And, this is, again, still Superman Chronicles that you can buy off of Amazon or your local comic book dealer if they have this.
Mystery Man of Steel reappears is
newspaper.
the Daily Star headline. Oh God, it's the Daily Star headline.
Did Clark write his own nickname?
Oh God, that'd be amazing.
I really do feel like that's something Clark would do, is give himself his own nickname.
He's just got like a DeviantArt account, and he's just Man of Steel 5,712.
Much like, I bet Spider-Man probably came up with, or Peter Parker probably came up with Webhead or Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man.
Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, I can see him coming up with. I
As
think
his calling card.
I can see Webhead being J. Jonah Jameson.
Probably. As we move on to Action Comics number 13, June 1939, this is an interesting issue because we get our first supervillain, and it is a more direct Superman story. This is the most Superman story, I think, of all the Superman stories we've probably seen in a long time. Purely because of the crime, the organized crime, him dealing with a lot of different things. I mean, yeah, there's Superman stopping dams and other stuff like that. I mean, you normally think of Superman dealing with large-scale problems, but I'm thinking of a Metropolis Superman story.
Yeah, okay, I'll grant you that.
Superman, maybe animated series Superman. I can probably see that this is probably something that someone who's familiar with the Superman animated series, like I am, is probably.
Right. That's fair.
Not the old timey cartoon. I'm talking like the '90s WB Kids Superman cartoon that occurred.
We really liked how much money the animated series for Batman made.
Yes,
so
the show that made them decide they needed a Justice League show. Moving on. Clark watches two cabs get in an accident, and one of the cabbies gets out and punches the other cab, and he says, "What the hell was that about?" And the guy says, "He's from the Cab Protection League, and he's trying to, get me to pay protection." Superman goes to investigate because Superman knows where this is. He doesn't have any sort of information. I tried to find,
he's actually going to the shop, or
he's going to the
office
headquarters. He's going to the headquarters of the cab who got hit, the cabbie that got hit, and I'm going like, yeah, that's where I would go too, but like, how would you know where that is?
We don't pages.
Yeah,
he's a reporter.
Yeah, okay, I'll give him that.
Can that just be his get out of jail free card?
That can be his equivalent of Batman's got a filing cabinet full of every mad scientist. I'm a reporter. I believe it better for Superman than I do Bruce Wayne.
Better than Bruce Wayne, not necessarily better than Batman.
No, I believe it better than Bruce Wayne and Batman purely because Batman has nothing to do in how Batman.
To clarify, in this era,
I fully
agree.
In this era, yes, Superman should be and probably will be more prepared than Batman, purely because he has journalistic abilities, and Batman isn't established as the world's greatest detective yet.
You're right.
So Clark should be better than Bruce at finding things out. Clark goes to this headquarters for the cab, watches another guy try to muscle in on this other cab. He pulls a gun on the headquarters director. Superman jumps in, beats the guy up, smacks the gun out of his hand, and does his fable, jump around until you tell me what I want to know. Unfortunately, however, the guy stabs Clark in the chest with a knife, which of course breaks. But what weirds me out is that threw Clark off. It threw Clark off enough that he kind of misses his footing, smacks into a building, and drops the guy as he falls to his death. I want to count this as a body count. Because he shouldn't have felt that.
He shouldn't have. I can't
think of any reason why that would have messed up his trajectory.
I agree, but I also can't think of any motivation that he would have for choosing to drop the guy after being stabbed.
I'm not saying that he did it on purpose. I'm saying that you were careless and that's your fault. Because you're Superman. How strong is your grip? How many people have you done this with in the past? How routine is this for you by now? And a guy doing something to you that you don't feel is the thing that makes you go all wobbly, not Lois jumping on your neck mid-jump. Yeah, okay. That to me feels...
I'll grant it a...
This is a question, Martine.
Grant it a manslaughter ding, which is distinctly different than a premeditated killing.
I'm going to give question mark dings. Question mark people who should be dead or who are in questionable life states or we're not sure if that's the cause of you. That's a question mark.
Okay, that works.
So, of course, coincidentally, the guy falls to his death right in front of other Cab Protection League members, and Superman watches them debate as what they should do now that this guy died. So they call up another cab company and say, hey, are you going to pay your money? And the guy says, of course not. Superman goes to follow these two guys who are about to go drive to that other cab company, beats them up, wrecks their car, and convinces them to bust up their own cabs. He essentially threatens them and says, here's a bunch of sledgehammers, do it or I'll, kick the tar out of you. And they're like, okay, sure. They break all these other cabs, and while that's happening, and while Superman is doing his own cab smashing, one of the guys runs. Superman stops him, halts him, kind of tosses him around a bit, And eventually, when the cops show up, the guy surrenders himself to the police and gives a confession.
Can we talk for a minute about how Superman's decisions are always, don't just take the...
I'm going to make you ruin stuff that you have.
Not necessarily him making people do that, although that's interesting in its own right, but the fact that anytime somebody has a thing and is misusing it, he destroys it instead of appropriating it. Did the exact same thing in the car issue where...
With all the drunk drivers. He destroys all the cars that are in them.
Destroys all the cars, destroys all of the factory that is building those cars. Like, by the way, we're going to need that for tanks in a year.
Also, what about all those people who are employed there?
Yeah.
You just put them out of jobs.
Yeah, it's like, that is extremely irresponsible. Thank you again for reminding me that you are just a man of action, not a man of thought.
You are a man of tomorrow, Clark.
Also,
everything will work out tomorrow.
Also, I feel like the closest comparison that we could make to all of the cabbies being forced to destroy their own cars is walking into a bandit stronghold, beating the shit out of the bandits, and then saying, by the way, shoot all your horses.
Shoot all your horses, throw all your... smack or crack all your bows and arrows, and melt down all your swords.
Yeah.
Because I said so. And they're like... it's hard to argue with that logic. Like, that's what they come up with. So, the guy surrenders to the cops. He gives a full confession. They're about to try and arrest Superman because they're like, hey, you can't just leave. We got to take your statement. He says, whatever. And Kool-Aid Man's his way out of the wall. And is never seen again, of course. There's a front page thing of a cab racketeer receives strong sentence. This guy, Reynolds, who is the guy that confessed, is in the car with the police. Weirdly enough, he's shotgun in the car with the cops. And there's a cop behind the other cop driving. It's not like the two cops are in the front like they should be, with the bad guy in the back.
I didn't even think of that.
With the bad guy in the back. Or the cop behind the bad guy and the other cop driving. You have the bad guy riding shotgun to the driver cop and the other cop sitting behind the driver. And, of course, with this strange thing, Reynolds uses a cigarette that is full of knockout gas to knock both of them out, pushes them to the side of the road while they're driving away, and he escapes.
And how exactly... I'm just trying to imagine. He's not affected by the gas?
He's built up an immunity to iocane powder.
That's exactly where I went.
I'm largely immune to jellyfish toxin.
God. I know. I recognize
Young
that.
Justice is Aqualad getting shot with Cheshire's darts, and he's like, jellyfish toxin. I am largely immune. And she's like, oh shit.
That show was so good.
God, please bring back
That show
Young
was
Justice.
so good.
I have made Matt watch Young Justice because I was like, you don't understand, and he's like, I don't think I do, and then watched it, and he's
and
like,
then
you're
you
right.
didn't have the second season.
And then I bought both of them, or I got them as presents for my sister, I think. And then I was like, you need to watch this now, and you're like, I do, I really do. And we watched it all in one night.
that in one day, yeah.
Yeah, and that's like 17 or 18 episodes in one night. Mm-hmm. That was a day of drinking and superheroes.
Yeah.
Clark has decided to find Reynolds because the Dragnet's put out, so he says, I'm going to just follow the Dragnet and see any places that they haven't checked. Finds a small cabin in the woods with the car the police were in. He goes, that must be the place. Jumps through the ceiling, finds Reynolds waiting for him, all lackadaisical. Reynolds points behind Superman to tell him, like, oh, we've been waiting for you. And I don't actually know, he's not in a wheelchair at this point. There sits a man. No, they carry him out in a chair.
You're right.
There sits a man in a doctor's smock lab coat thing. I want to say, give him some rubber gloves and boots and he looks like Dr. Horrible.
Or dye it the appropriate colors and you've got like a commissar outfit. It's that kind of like button overcoat.
Yeah, it's a very distinct look, but it's a bald man and you're like, oh, is this Lex Luthor? Is this Lex Luthor as a paraplegic scientist man?
Surprise, no.
Surprise, you're wrong. It's Ultra Humanite. Which also threw me off because I'm like, isn't Ultra Humanite a monkey with a human brain sticking out of it? And I'm correct.
What?
Yes. That's a thing that happens, and I'm extremely excited to find out how Ultra Humanite changes from this man in a chair who is clearly paralyzed from the waist down to a monkey with a human's brain sticking out of his head.
That's got to be like a 1960s change.
I hope so. I'm excited. So regardless, Superman says, you're full of crap, bro. I know you're trying to get world domination through cab racketeering, because that's going to be a really easy way to do this. And you already look pretty old. You got white hair and you're bald, and you don't look like you're in your prime. I'm going to stop you. walks forward to him, but is hit by like a force field that looks like it's shooting electricity and fire at him, and he just kind of passes out. And this is the first time we've seen Superman bested.
Yeah. This is the first time we've seen him hurt.
Now, I will stress, later in Superman mythos, electricity does have an effect on him.
Really?
There's a woman. Gosh, she was in the animated series. She's in a couple of... I think she has a Suicide Squad appearance at some point. I want to say, like, Livewire or Jolt or Spark. Like, one of those weird names. And she would travel through electricity, much like Electro did in Spider-Man. And and that was how she bested him. It's electricity. It's energy. It's not force. And I can see that Superman does have a certain... weakness to anything that isn't just straight out and out strength. Mm-hmm. Radiation he's affected by because of the sun. I would imagine electricity probably jolts him much like a defibrillator would.
Yeah,
you would need a lot of volts. I will say that he will probably need a lot more volts than a normal human.
Yeah, but still not proportional to how much stronger he is.
It's science. It's Superman is a character created out of science, largely grounded in science. This makes sense. You shock an elephant, it's going to hurt it. In the animal world, Superman is a big rhino or an elephant compared to everybody else's like meerkats. You shock the elephant, he's going to get hurt. So I'm going to say that, yeah, this makes total sense to me. Because the next scene we see is they tie Superman up to one of those big saw blade log splitters, and they try and, oh man, this is great. They try and saw Superman's head open, and it just breaks against his head, killing Reynolds because one of the shrapnel pieces that flies off of the saw because it contacts Superman's head just straight up nails him right in the neck. And
so the moral of the story is if you have something that incapacitates Superman to the point where you can actually strap him to like a gurney, don't try anything else. Just keep doing that one thing. Yeah. Just strap him to a wire.
Perpetually shock him.
Yeah.
It's impressive that they made that stupid decision, and I won't even count that as a body count for Superman because he didn't even do anything. That's their fault. Yeah. It's their own fault that happened. Superman's about to wake up, but Ultrahumanite says, look, we gotta bail. So his two pilots come out. They carry him to... There's three, actually. There's three guys here. I didn't notice that. I thought there were only two. So there's three pilots of this kind of cool Airbus plane thing. Mono-winged plane that has... Yeah, it's weird looking.
Bright red?
It's like the Magic School Bus has a cone nose sitting on top of a surfboard.
Yes! Yeah!
It's a weird looking plane, but I'm sure it's a design that Ultrahumanite came up with. Superman wakes up in the midst of this cabin on fire because I guess when you destroy a saw blade, it lights everything on fire. I would think that the saw blade...
No, burn it.
Oh, yes, the Ultrahumanite tells the pilots to burn the cabin down, so that's fine. So Superman gets out of the cabin, chases the plane because he jumps up in the air and goes, oh, there they are, and starts jumping towards the plane. The pilots notice this, and Superman just gut checks. He hockey checks the propeller of this plane, and it just crashes to the ground. And as he's going through the wreckage, doesn't find Ultrahumanite. However, I am going to say that he did kill those three pilots.
I'm totally down with that. This is just... I mean, I'm not going to call it murder because it's not necessarily premeditated.
And they are criminals. They did attack him. They tried to burn him alive.
But he does straight up kill those guys.
Yes. That's the last panel of the issue, and that's the first villain that we're like, wow, okay, he's going to come back because you don't see the body. This is the first wink and a nod that we have to no body, no dead. So what we're going to move into now is Superman number 1, which is 64 pages, just like Batman number 1 is when he gets his full book. Now, the interesting thing here about Superman number 1 is they recycle Action Comics 1 through 4. And instead of like Batman did, which was 4 new stories. So again, this is probably a quarterly. This comes out in July of 1939, and what I found interesting about Superman number 1 is that they do recycle this, but the story that they put in the front of this is the part of the story we don't get in Action Comics number 1. If you remember, if you don't, please go back and listen to our episode about that. Action Comics number 1 starts in medias res, where he is saving a woman from the electric chair by dropping off this woman to the governor and saying she's the one that did it. This is the story about how he gets that woman. And it's really weird that they kind of like just decided to put that in. Like, I almost want to say that they probably had this written before, and when they pitched it to Action's like, no, you don't. You only get this many pages. you only get so many pages. You have to tell the story in this amount of time, so they cut out the half that they didn't need. And I don't know. That to me seems like what it feels. But
it does feel that way. I'm not sure if that's necessarily what it is.
Right. So as we start with this, it starts with the Superman origin story, and it's already a little changed.
Rather dramatically, in fact. Is this our first retcon?
This could be the first retcon, I want to say, in history of comics.
Yeah, specifically for superhero comics.
Specifically for Superman, this is probably the first retcon. So they mention in the very beginning, when Clark lands on Earth, passing motorists discover the sleeping babe within, turn the child over to an orphanage. In this, they name the Kents as an elderly couple who find the baby and turn him into the orphanage, and then they adopt him. So it's not so much as they retroactively change something about this continuity.
Yeah.
They
added stuff.
His backstory by making it fuller and deeper.
By the way, we had a flashback.
What they didn't do with Batman. They don't talk anymore about Batman's backstory. They're just like, yeah, this is still what it is. His parents are dead, and they're like, we're going to give you who his parents were, and we're going to show you that he got adopted. So, they also show that the Kents are aware of his abilities, and they tell him that he needs to practice and be better, and that, just shows a variety of things of Superman doing. Also, the Kents are dead.
Yep.
In this
It is
universe.
interesting how much that changes around throughout history.
So Clark is by himself. He has no family. There's no one for villains to threaten other than Lois. And as we see this kind of conclusion come to an end with the background story, we catch up with Clark walking into the Daily Planet saying, hey, I want a job. And Lois is like, good luck, go ask the editor. The editor says no. And Clark decides, well, I guess I'll find a scoop and write about it, and then they'll have to have me.
That's the can-do spirit that made America great.
Hell yeah. So Superman listens to a radio broadcast of a mob attacking a county jail, and he says, oh,
he goes,
it's the editor.
He listens in on the editor and finds out what's happening.
He does Superman eavesdropping.
In his very first thing, he scoops somebody else from his own paper.
Yep. So Superman eavesdrops by changing into the Superman outfit, going to the window and listening to somebody. Goes to the mob that is outside the county jail, finds out that there's a group of people going to lynch a guy. Mm-hmm. And they're going to tie him up to this tree. Superman shows up, beats back the lynchers, and puts the guy back in jail and says, what was that about? And they say, oh, well, I'm being held here for murdering Jack Kennedy, not the president or his brother. But he didn't do it, and he says also there's another woman who's about to be brought to the electric chair who didn't do it. We've been framed by some other woman, and this woman, B. Carroll. So Clark phones the reporter, the editor, and says, I've got a story. And the guy says, you're all right, Kent. Report tomorrow for work with this story. Clark says, perfect. He goes to the club where B. Carroll is supposed to be, finds her, goes to her room as Superman and says, you're coming with me, you're going to confess. And she says, like, hell I am, pulls a gun on him. And he, of course, crushes the gun and then jumps with her out the window. And then that's apparently where Action Comics 1 picks up. But we don't have that in our volume because it just ends there. And then it just says, by the way, note at the bottom of this volume. It says, the story continues back on page 5. The original Superman #1 comic reprinted Action Comics number 1 through 4, except for these preceding 4 pages, which were all new. Mm-hmm. So, I just also like that the woman tries to, like, sex up Superman, like, flirt with him to get out of this. And he's like, lady, no. She's like, you attract me. Couldn't we talk this over?
Yeah, there's that one line, and then immediately it's like, you're going to regret this.
He's like, nah, baby. So they also show some interesting scientific explanations of Superman's amazing strength, which is 1 page of just showing apparently people at Krypton just jumped around all the time.
No red sun?
Yeah,
there's none of that explanation.
There's no red sun at Krypton. Everyone on Krypton had powers, which is something we don't actually see in normal Kryptonian histories. That when Kryptonians come to Earth, they're like, oh, look, we have powers. They apparently all have powers. They also show the relative size of Krypton to Earth, which is very large. I want to say it's not much larger, but it is at least three times the size of Earth. Mm-hmm. And then they do the whole grasshopper and ants thing to explain like why he's able to have strength and that he does. And then the last thing in this book is a short story by Siegel and Schuster of just Clark kind of one-upping a reporter or a detective and figuring out this. It's not really important. It's not plot relevant. It's just an interesting thing. It's a 2-page short story with very small print about Clark as Clark showing up a detective.
It doesn't even necessarily show him up. It's like, oh, hey, I lied to you about not being Superman, and that made you look stupid. Right. And then, oh, by the way, I interviewed the person you had arrested for murder and accidentally let him get away, and then Superman brought him back.
Right. It's a very Clark thing to do.
God, you're right. Dysfunctional and rude.
Dysfunctional, rude, and slightly in a huge gamble that works out purely because he's Superman. So now that we're done with this issue, I want to talk about something that you and I had discussed a little bit prior to this recording. We're going to get to Arden Leigh's interview in a little bit. We just want to wrap up these 3 stories and then move right into that, and you guys can enjoy that. It's going to be a little bit longer of an episode because there's a lot of really good stuff that we talk about in that interview. But whenever Superman does Superman stuff, he always changes into the Superman garb and then changes back to Clark Kent garb. In stuff now, cartoons, comics, anything, media, Clark will always do Superman stuff in the Clark Kent clothes, like X-ray vision a thing, or heat vision a thing, or telescopic vision a thing, or listen to something, or perhaps super speed run or fly, or maybe lift something while no one's looking. He does surreptitious things while dressed as Clark. In this, he never does that. He always does Superman things as Superman. He keeps those 2 lives very separate.
Except for the train.
Except for the train.
That's the only example I can think of.
Right.
Everything else, he is remaining 100% incognito.
Maybe listening to the
Superman.
kids in the courtroom, but even then, that's something that even Clark Kent could probably do conceivably in
that's
that small of a room.
Yes.
So that's just something I noticed through the whole thing of this, is that they are very determined on making a distinction between Clark Kent and Superman. Which is fine. I mean, we never see Bruce Wayne do any Batman stuff, except for that one time when he goes into Turg's shop and pretends to be buying groceries.
Yeah, but even then, that was just him being incognito.
Right, but Bruce is heavily acting as Bruce Wayne whenever he's Bruce. Mm-hmm. Much like Clark is heavily being Clark. They never allow their 2 personas to mix, unlike currently where Bruce maybe will know a language in passing and greet someone in that language and impress someone, or know something about something, or put someone off guard by his knowledge of foreign politics.
Bruce Wayne being vaguely proficient at something.
The Playboy scaring you with how up-to-date, in the know, and extremely cultured he is Bruce Wayne's allowance for the Batman to seep through his identity.
True. Yeah.
Versus Clark is Clark. Mm-hmm. Big as an ox, dumb as a rock, and as cowardly as a cat.
He plays up the role to the hilt in this.
So it's very interesting that they have that sort of extreme divide. Now, that's the end of that's the first year of Superman.
Yeah.
Year plus a couple months, and we get Ultra Humanite. The only villain so far that even I had to look up. I'm not saying I'm a walking, talking encyclopedia of DC, but still, I even had to be like, is that the guy who I think it is? Regardless, it's funny seeing Batman's first villain is Hugo Strange, who is arguably, yes, a C-stringer, but then when he gets his book, he gets Catwoman and Joker. Then when you get Superman, before he gets his book, he gets Ultra Humanite. Now, I don't want to say there's a connection between the 2 of those characters being mad scientists and bald and vaguely... Well, no, they're not vaguely European, either of them.
Intelligentsia.
Yeah, I don't want to say there's a connection between that, but it is very interesting that the people that they both go up against as their major villain at the time is mad scientist.
Yeah, it's a recognizable archetype.
Yeah. So I just thought that was funny. I don't know if there's a connection there. I don't know if there's something to talk about, but it is strange to me.
Tell me that was intentional.
Oh, God, I didn't even hear that. God, I'm still waiting for that one joke that I want to put in that I can't yet. Until we see Doctor Strange again, I can't do the joke. But I'm excited. Right. I've got it locked in the chamber. I'm going to make it work, even if it takes a full 2 minutes. But it's just, this is a weird sort of wrap up for Superman. We don't have a Superman that we can recognize currently in this volume.
Both his character and his enemies. Neither of those are recognized.
None of this. There's no Metropolis. There's no Daily Planet. All we have is Lois.
There's no uncomplicated saving of everybody. You're right. Lois is the only constant.
Lois and I want to say Ultra Humanite are the only 2 things that you can maybe say make it Superman. But even Ultra Humanite is an everybody villain, so it's not even like it is a specific Superman villain. So conversely, you've got Batman, who's got a rogues gallery, and Robin.
Yep.
I think the equivalent would be if Superman had Brainiac, Luthor, and
Jimmy.
I want to say I was going for a female villain to round out. Okay, well, maybe the electricity chick that I was thinking about. This is going to bother me. I'm going to have to look this up. And then Lois and Jimmy. Because you have Commissioner Gordon and a sidekick, so I would say Lois takes the place of Commissioner Gordon, and Jimmy would take the place of Robin. So you would need 3 villains that are recognizable for Superman, and then what have you. So we don't have that, and that's interesting and strange to look at. Going, okay, not Superman that we would normally see, and not necessarily a Superman we like.
Yeah.
Versus the Batman, we're okay with Batman. We don't necessarily like him more. We're just like, this is Batman, and he's more entertaining than this Superman.
Yeah, that's not my Batman, but it's recognizable as Batman.
Correct.
And then Superman, I suspect that the reason we're not seeing the Superman we recognize is that at this point, it's like mid-year 1940. Around there. Actually,
Batman, yes. Batman is 1940. Superman just goes to 38-39, this one volume.
Oh, really? Okay. My suspicion is we just haven't really seen the effect of the multimedia property on this yet. We haven't seen all of the impact of the radio show. We're coming up on the cartoon in a year further. The comic strip is just getting started. Those are going to be probably what round out Superman as the super palatable, uncomplicated, uncontroversial character that we see now.
I think I agree, and that's weird.
Yep.
By the way, I also want to point out that I win. It is Livewire.
Nice. Didn't Gail Simone write her at some point?
I think she might have. We're gonna put some pictures up of her, purely because I like being right. But this is her.
Oh, nice. Yeah, okay. I have a vague recollection of that character.
So there you go.
Nice.
Where I'm just really proud of myself. That's
well
me.
Done.
That's me pulling out the obscure knowledge. But yeah, I think we're at a good spot with this currently, and then I think the next person we're going to get to is Wonder Woman.
Works for me.
We're trying to. We're still getting our materials, but I think that's the next person on our schedule is Wonder Woman, and then we're going to start diving into the rest of the JSA. So that we kind of we're able to give you basically who I think you said this right. Who's the cast of characters at the current time?
Mm-hmm. The dramatis personae,
right? And then from there we'll move around. We'll hop between characters, primarily staying with the Trinity and anybody else that moves to be a JLA character. And the JSA will come back to basically Jay Garrick as the Flash, Alan Scott as Green Lantern, Zatara, Sandman, Dr. Fate. If we have any of those volumes, yes, we will continue to do that. Purely just because it's cool, and you would probably it'd be interesting to see. And the more we do of them, we'll see if you guys like that. If you want to hear more of that, we will totally do that and answer that. Our goal currently is to cover pretty much the Golden Age and then move forward.
Yeah, see what happens.
So, I'm excited to do that.
So before we say goodbye to Superman, though, there are 3 things that I want to do.
Yes.
The first we've already done, and it's have a good conversation with Arden Leigh and the 2 of us, and that's coming up next.
Yes. If you are interested in the dynamic between Clark Kent and Lois Lane currently as it stands in this volume, that is a very awesome interview.
Mm-hmm. And highly insightful.
Yes.
I've said it before, but I did not expect to come out of it with my mind changed the way it was.
Yes.
So highly recommended. Keep track of her stuff. Check her out on Twitter, all that stuff.
Yes, all her handles are there.
And check out her band, too, right?
Yeah, Arden and the Wolves.
I need to listen to that. I saw her post some stuff about doing some recording.
Yes.
I need to check that out. The second thing I want to talk about is, first, I want to give you the floor because we had conversations about newspapers.
Yes.
So?
Oh boy. Okay, so this is a thing that's been bothering me because if I was allowed to do whatever I wanted with the bedroom, Shannon would be very angry with me because I would have a lot of pictures of the different newspapers from all over the DC universe and like red string connecting them. Because
okay, I'm glad you clarified that.
Yeah, that almost got weird. But,
no, it was for a good 5 seconds.
It is weird. I'm going to fully admit that. But I would do this to try and pinpoint where everyone is in the DC universe currently, and we made the connection that in the Batman Volume 1 archives that we have, in one of the Joker stories, the Daily Star reports on the Joker being arrested. Superman's paper is the Daily Star. Batman, when talking to Dr. Death in episode 1, if you want to go back and listen to us talk about this, we kind of have a moment about it, phones the Daily Globe to respond to Dr. Death. However, the Daily Star reports on the Joker. I'm inclined to believe that Superman, Clark Kent, reported on the Joker being arrested, which means Batman and Superman are likely in the same city because they both talk about Manhattan. Superman specifically has his Cleveland moment that we talk about in last episode, but a lot of the landmarks that we do see are clearly New York landmarks. Batman is in Manhattan. I want to say they're either in the same area, or Batman at least reads the Daily Star as an intelligent socialite, gets newspapers from around the U.S. to keep in the know, which is how he knows so much. So if anything, Bruce Wayne is reading Clark Kent's work. I feel happy and I feel better about myself now that I've got that on tape, digitally, because there's no tape.
That's true. That's true. We live in a tapeless world. So I'm actually going to throw this out here. I don't think Clark Kent had a Cleveland moment. I think Metropolis at this point, or the city that he's in, is
Cleveland, Ohio.
It is Cleveland. It is Cleveland. Because here are the pieces, and all props to the Mary Sue and Wikipedia for starting me down this path and giving some evidence. So, remember the dam in Vallejo?
Yes.
That's the Hoover Dam, which is in Ohio.
Did they say it's Vallejo?
That's the name that they give.
The Vallejo Dam,
or the fictionalized version.
The dam that he saves last episode. If you want to hear what we're talking about, he stops a dam from breaking.
Yeah, that is the Vallejo Dam, which is clearly based on the Hoover Dam, which is in Ohio.
Okay.
Siegel was born in Cleveland. Page 24 of the second issue.
Wait, the Hoover Dam's in Ohio?
Apparently.
Wait,
I didn't know this.
I'm having a Fallout New Vegas moment because Hoover Dam's in there. You can walk to the Hoover Dam.
Wait. No. Ohio. Dams. Hoover Dam in Glendon Township near Westerville, Ohio. Dams the big... There are multiple Hoover Dams.
Okay, so you're not wrong. You're just...
Wrong. I'm wrong.
You've mentioned the wrong
What?
Hoover Dam.
Okay. So
there are two Hoover Dams, not the one you know of from Fallout New Vegas or from most popular lexicons of dams around the world. There is a Cleveland dam called the Hoover Dam.
Let's set that aside. Siegel was born in Cleveland.
Okay.
Page 24, when he is calling the pictures in the general's tent back to the newspaper, he calls it to the Evening News in Cleveland, Ohio. On page 144 with the oil...
I missed that one, yeah.
He is calling for Meek and Bronson in Cleveland.
Yeah, he's totally... Yeah, they're in Ohio.
But here's the best thing. That's not necessarily mutually contradictory with the fact that Batman is established in New York.
In Manhattan.
So there are 3 different ways of going about this. It is either... there was a separate Daily Star, like the New York Daily Star and the Cleveland Daily Star.
Possible, yes.
Possible. Or the location of Metropolis was retconned by the time that Batman comes on the scene. Possible.
Possible, though we do know in the last episode we talk about Batman being advertised at the end of the Drunk Drivers issue.
Yeah, you're right.
So...
Okay. So maybe not quite. But even then, like, it wasn't established as New York until later in the Batmans. Or... and my personal favorite option, in the DC universe, New York and Cleveland are right next to each other.
Much like Springfield is between 5 different states in the Simpsons universe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. let's put it this way. I'm going to say that Clark reported on the Joker purely because the Joker murdered, I want to say, 30 people.
Yeah.
That's a homicidal maniac. That's a mass murderer. Those guys get national press.
That's fair.
The Joker is a
and we have established that Clark Kent travels a lot.
Yes, he does. He takes a lot of trains.
He went to South America in his first issue.
Yeah, he went to South America. He trains to DC, but instead just runs.
Goes to New York for
the World's Fair. Clark is a well-traveled reporter. Yeah, I think it's totally fair to say that Clark would report on the Joker purely because of the amount of bodies that he dropped, and is probably well aware of Batman.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
If not well aware, then at least has cursory knowledge that stuff is weird in Manhattan. Let's talk about it. As he's been talking to someone from the New York Times, probably, and be like, "Dude, Stuff is weird in my city. And this blimp that blew crap up. There's a dude dressed like a bat. We got this creepy clown guy who just killed a bunch of people. And, dude, man, we got weird stuff happening. There was monster people just pulling the L train down. This place sucks. I'm going to go to Cleveland.
We have a guy who jumps people to moral rectitude.
We have a guy who destroyed a neighborhood by himself. Wait, what? How? With his bare hands. Yeah, okay, I'm going to Miami. I'm going to Miami or California or Canada or just as long because it's not Marvel Canada, so Canada here is probably okay.
That's rough, buddy.
Yeah, that's rough, buddy. So we're going to end this circus of madness and head on to the real good stuff that I'm sure, or at least I hope you all are waiting to hear, is Arden Leigh in our interview with her about Clark Kent and Lois Lane, the relationship that they have. Please, please, please do not skip this. It is very awesome. And we'll end it out after that. Hey everybody, so this is going to be our interview with Arden Leigh. We recorded this a few months ago, so there is still some context with us talking about Wonder Woman and Superman, because this was before Rebirth had been announced. So just so you know, this is a little out of date, but it's still relevant to the topics we're discussing on the show. Thanks for listening. Hi everybody, and thanks again for listening to the second half of this episode. We are covering an interview with Arden Leigh, who's going to be talking with us about the relationship between Lois and Clark that we've been seeing over the last 2 episodes of Superman. We're really excited. Arden, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself so they can kind of get an idea of who you are?
Hi, my name is Arden Leigh, and I'm a dating coach and a sexuality educator. I am the founder of the Siren Seduction Forum for Women, and I also coach men at the Interpersonal Attraction Institute.
Awesome. What do you kind of coach them on? What are some of the things you work with them on?
With the Interpersonal Attraction Institute, I basically work with men on coaching them on how to approach women in a way that's going to build attraction and be fun and playful and not creepy.
Always good.
And to engage with them. And I essentially teach women, kind of the same thing. Although there are some kind of gender normative differences sometimes. And then in addition to that, I'm also a sexuality educator, specializing in alternative sexualities such as BDSM and non-monogamy. So in both fields, I'm sort of like a kink positive dating coach.
Awesome. This all sounds like stuff Clark needs, honestly.
Yeah, especially with all that super strength. You really got to learn to play safely in the bedroom. You don't want to have an accident there.
Well, that would explain a lot with him, honestly. So some of the stuff, Matt, you've got a lot of notes I see over there that you have some specific points that I'm sure you want to hit. Would you like to start us off with some scenarios that you would like Arden's take on? So specific instances from the issues that we've gone over?
So a lot of this for me was going through and trying to identify what exactly was going on in the relationship between Lois and Clark, or more precisely, what it was. Because it's not exactly clear. It's not exactly positive. That's the key thing that I took away, is it's not a healthy relationship. In my mind, it feels like we start off with 2 pretty immature characters who are separated by a gulf of knowledge. This mainly the secret identity and also the behaviors that Clark exhibits because he's trying to maintain that secret identity, and he's
doing very badly at it.
Not only is he doing badly, he's doing bad things.
Yeah, he's being very evasive and obviously untruthful to her.
Not even that. So this is the first sort of scenario that I would throw sort of in your direction, Arden.
Yeah, go for it.
So we all have this idea of Clark Kent as kind of this bumbling guy, or at least the old kind of idea of that golden age version of Clark Kent. Oh, he's a bumbler, he's an oaf, he's a coward. But it's not just that. It feels like he's actually putting people in danger because of his cowardice. The specific instance that I'm thinking about is they seem to have an ongoing on-again, off-again relationship, and Lois says, okay, I'll give you a break, we'll go out on a date. And while they're out, somebody coded as like a mafioso or a tough kind of shoves over and says, hey, I'm taking this dance. And not only is it a, hey, you didn't stand up for yourself, Clark, but Clark says to Lois, just give him the dance and it'll all be fine.
Oh, man. Yeah, because he could obviously defend her because he's Superman, but he doesn't want her to know, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Unfortunately, like, and this is a common issue even in like normal people who aren't, from other planets. We all feel like we have something about us that is different and therefore shameful that we're afraid to let our partners know about. And for so many people, especially for myself being a BDSM educator, for so many people, they come to me with that about their kink. They're like, I have this thing about me that's kind of weird and kind of different. And I'm so afraid that if I let my partner know about it, that A, they're going to reject me, or B, that somehow this is going to endanger them. And you know what? We saw this in Ultron too, with Hulk and Black Widow. And believe me, I could go on about that. Is that he ends up rejecting her because she accepts his darkness and he doesn't accept it in himself. So he ends up pushing her away because he's like, the people I love can't be too close to me or else they're going to get hurt. And I sense that might be something that's going on with Clark in this instance too, where it's like, if people know that I'm Superman and Lois gets too close to me, she's going to be made into a target. So I need to overcompensate and basically be as not Superman as possible, even to the point of endangering Lois with this mafioso, because I'm trying to make this for the greater good, so that ultimately she's not going to be targeted by people who are a lot more powerful than that guy. So I can empathize with his intentions, but ultimately, if you're going to have a relationship with someone, you can't have such a huge secret like that that's going to create a rift in your intimacy.
Absolutely, and I think it's interesting that you touched upon the point where he's trying to do it for her protection. That's very much the common, or at least contemporary, explanation for that. It is he's concerned for her safety because he doesn't want her to be in trouble or be a damsel in distress or get kidnapped and whatnot. That is usually never the case, though. In this first year of Superman, really, it ends up she puts herself in dangerous situations, and he ends up having to save her because she ends up having to she ends up just being there and almost being in the way. And I feel like telling her ahead of time that this is who he is, she might just back off, as opposed to trying to be where Superman is all the time, to get close to him, to talk to him. She seems to be almost in more danger to try and connect with him as Superman than if he was honest with her and told her, yes, I'm Superman. Now please stop running into dangerous locations where I am and me having to save you.
Yeah, but on the other hand, at the end of the day, she is a journalist, and I'm sure he's also frightened for his identity and for his privacy, Yeah. I think one of the things that's interesting is I had a friend a while back who was not even dating, but just friends with this guy who was a pretty big like R&B artist, a pretty big household name. And, they were talking about collaborating on something and whatever. And there was, I think, even like a contract from some record label in existence that he could not follow her on Instagram. Or if he did follow her on Instagram or whatever, basically all of his fans would notice and would obsess and be like, oh, well, who's this new girl that he's following? So literally he would, if he liked one of her photos that she posted, he would screenshot it and text it to her and be like, oh, hey, I like that. And she'd be like, why don't you just click like? And he's like, I literally can't do that to you. So I think there's something to be said for when you are as powerful a person as Superman, you do want to protect people, and also there's a level of it too where it's also about your own privacy and your own safety. And it's possible that he's been on a couple dates with Lois, but they've been on and off, and maybe he doesn't know if he can trust her yet.
I think that's a lot of it.
Oh, that's probably a huge amount of it, judging by just how Lois also acts and she's a very good journalist. They establish that she's good at what she does. She has her own, I think, column, if I'm not mistaken, or at least features that she does. She's a woman in the 30s doing journalism, and she's pretty much written, or it's perceived that she's very good at what she does. She's a professional. And it's well established that there is at least some competition between her and Clark for who gets stories.
And maybe Clark then has some reason to believe that it might be possible that her career is more important to her than her relationships, especially if we're looking at this being the 30s, when most women didn't have careers in fields like journalism, where they had to kind of be a little tougher in order to hang in the boys club kind of field, and also potentially give up relationships and marriage and stuff like that, which of course we didn't really see that sort of liberated movement for women coming until many decades later. So I could understand why Clark might be like, oh, if I tell her about my identity, it's possible that story is more important to her than I am.
I think that's actually right on the nose, because one thing I noticed going through in all of these stories, the only times when Lois is outright emotionally manipulative is when it is a professional thing, when she is trying to get the story. She is a cutthroat reporter, and the only time she's actually manipulative, not just kind of being a bit of a jerk after Clark demonstrates how cowardly or unprofessional he is, the times where she is being cutthroat, it is professional.
Except for that one time where she roofies him. This is a good one to go on to, I think.
Okay. So I think this, for the record, I'm going to preface this by saying that I think this is a situation where we would benefit from reading the intent of the writers and that context. So there's a point where Clark gets assigned a story that Lois really wants. If memory serves, that's when someone from the Daily Star at that point is going to go to interview the manager of Superman, and she knows it's not actually Superman, someone is impersonating him, so she wants that particular story.
She wants to out him as a fraud, rather.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Exactly that. And it's initially assigned to Clark. So she says to Clark, hey, let's go on a date this night. I've got a super important project. Oh, that's more important than me? Okay, so they go on the date, and things are going interestingly, but everybody's got lies that they're telling. Everybody's pretending that this is actually just fine instead of two people really using each other and lying to each other. And then, in order to make sure that he doesn't get to the interview and she has the chance to, she roofies him.
Yeah, that would destroy some trust.
Yep.
And it's interesting, especially because it's not stated that Clark realizes that there is a drug in his drink, but he definitely says, it's definitely explained that it doesn't affect him, but he sells it. He sells the idea that he's been drugged, allows Lois to think that he's been knocked out, and lets her go. And at that point, I'm wondering, if you were on a date with someone, and you saw them, or not even saw them, you were able to tell that they roofied you to get out of being with you. At that point, would you end up wanting to be with that person just in general, knowing the kind of person that they are?
I mean, that's a pretty good question right there. I could see Clark understanding that she's doing it for the purpose of the story, and in a weird way kind of going along with her plan, not only to cover his Superman identity, but also I could see him being like, that's really cute that she tried that. It's almost like when someone is like play wrestling you and you let them win. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh yeah, my girlfriend's trying to wrestle me, and I'll let her win. It's kind of cute. It's kind of endearing that she's trying. I think there's certainly, in terms of drugging someone's drink, it seems like there's certainly some gender roles at play, and we see Talia al Ghul in Batman and Son also drugging Batman's drink, and it's something it's one of those things where it's kind of not cool, and it's like that if the genders were reversed, it would be like there would be a lot more outcry about it. And of course, it's not cool to do something non-consensual to a guy either, even if he is physically a lot stronger than you are, and you're much less capable of raping that person than they would be if the situation were reversed. It's still not cool, but of course we have to take into consideration the era as well. And if these were issues that were written a long time ago, some of the sort of rape culture jokes were still funny,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's definitely some of it. They weren't exactly sensitive to the implication and what that means or how harmful that is. I just find it funny that Lois is so mean to the character of Clark. She's so verbally abusive, and she's verbally detested by him, and very honest about it. And then she comes back and says, "Oh, but I want to go out with you." And it's very clear that she's using him. Whereas Clark is obviously being dishonest with her in the same vein, allowing her to see him this way and allowing himself to be treated this way for the chance to going out with her. It seems almost, yes, obviously there are reasons they are doing these things. Clark is trying to hide his identity. But at a certain point, I would wonder if it just becomes too much work, and it's you don't like seeing the person you're into be that mean. You would rather see them, be the person that you know that they are, rather for the sake of your own secret.
I like to think that maybe Clark has some sensitivity to the situation that Lois is in her career, and understanding that to get where she is, she had to be a little mean to kind of climb her way at the top. It's like the way that women in the workplace, still get referred to as bossy or bitchy or whatever, and men are referred to as leaders. And I'd like to think that maybe one of the things he admires about her is her ambition and her strength and her intelligence. And unfortunately, back then, sometimes as a woman in a very male-dominated field, that meant being a little mean. And I could see him, beneath it all, being Superman still. I could see him again being like, that's kind of cute that she feels she has to be mean to me. I'm not like affected by it. I feel like we saw that same kind of dynamic in the first Magic Mike movie, where he's just super, I think that was it. I hope I'm recalling that correctly, where, Channing Tatum's character is just
right.
super nice to the girl the whole time, even though she's kind of making fun of him and, just being kind of nasty and kind of dismissive of him at first because he's a dancer and everything. So I could see that archetype happening. And I could also understand there's a difference between secrecy and privacy. And I could see why Clark doesn't necessarily trust her with his secret yet. He's trying to spend more time with her and suss out if it's something that he can trust her with or not.
That's very much, again, the contemporary version of them is that Lois is very good at her job. She is now, the last time I read contemporary Superman that was being released, Lois is in charge of the Daily Planet's video news, like their daily news anchors and things like that. She's the director of that, and she's graduated to a very high position in news. And I think it's very obvious that Lois is good at her job, and Clark admires that. And I think you're right in that he allows her to be this way because he understands that she's trying to be as good as she can be, and he's not taking offense to it. And it's personally a thing that I hadn't thought about now, and after you explaining that, and the more I think about it, that's probably exactly what it is. It's admiration rather than offense.
Yeah, I think he understands the context in which all that is happening, and I think if she were really a mean-spirited person, he wouldn't be attracted to her. But I think deep beneath the surface, we see, she's not mean. She's just had to become a little hardened in order to get where she is.
She's had to deal with some stuff.
Yeah, and being a woman in any male-dominated field. I mean, actually, that's John, that post that you and I first met on Facebook about. Right. Women writers in Hollywood just blocking everyone,
yeah, I remember.
and refusing to engage with them because they get so much shit, and how it's not a nice thing to do. It's not compassionate, but we can also understand where that comes from. We can understand the context around it.
I kind of want to circle back just a second, because there was something that you said, and I want to distill it because I found it fascinating.
Yeah,
Almost
for sure.
the idea that we're used to thinking in terms of power dynamics and how much that can change what behaviors are how bad or how permissible, I guess. I guess how bad or impactful is a better way of thinking about them. But the idea that Superman, him as a character, as a person, has so much emotional resilience that some of these toxic behaviors that Lois is exhibiting towards him are not a big deal because he's not actually being hurt by them.
Yeah, exactly. It's that idea that as a confident and assured man, and one with a lot of superpowers, he's not really worried about her doing harm or damage to him. You know,
He's still, as we keep seeing through the episodes we've done, a Superman.
Yeah, exactly. And he has. I'm trying to think of more examples from other films where we see that dynamic in play. Because I feel like Magic Mike is definitely one of them where she's kind of insulting him and he's just like letting it roll off his back. The beginning of The General's Daughter was like that too, right? Where he's bringing her the I think it's John Travolta in that movie, right? And he's like bringing her a basket of like bath stuff, and she's being like a super hard ass toward him, being like, oh, what's this supposed to be like? You think I smell? And he's like, no, I just thought. He's like, are you getting this for me because I'm a woman? You assume that like, and he's like, no, I love using bath stuff myself. I light a couple candles, put on some music and relax, and it's like nothing that she can say, and there you have another woman who's in a male dominated field who's had to become a hard ass in order to get where she is and get respect. And she's just giving him shit for coming in and bringing her a gift, and he's just kind of like letting it roll off. And eventually she kind of softens toward him because he's just not letting it rattle his confidence. He's kind of like, I get it. You do what you need to do. It's cool. I'm not offended. I understand.
And I think an even more recent example would be Furiosa in Mad Max Fury Road, where Max...
Oh, yeah! That's true. That's very true.
Where
that was
Max
a great movie.
never takes offense to her being a survivalist and someone who points a gun at him and gives him orders and commands. He just accepts it because he understands that she's survived out here too. She knows what she's doing. He never questions her, but he also never says like, shut up, you don't know what you're doing, or don't talk to me like that. He just listens and follows orders as long as he's alive and gets the stuff off his face.
Yeah, and I think there's a similarity between his character and also the director, who apparently, I read an article where he was quoted as saying, like, there had to be a Furiosa character in this movie because if we just had Max go in and rescue these women who are being held as sex slaves, apparently, then it kind of becomes this... It becomes this whole other narrative. We really had to give a woman the agency to do that and make that decision. And I feel like Max is almost kind of the same way. Like, all right, I get this. I'm not coming in trying to say these women are mine now. I'm just trying to help out and have justice be seen.
Interesting. One thing, just as a thought to append on that string, if part of the reason that it works as well as it does, or it can be as relatively healthy as it is, to have that relationship between Lois and Clark, is because he has the emotional resilience. I'm imagining 80s Bruce Wayne, I'm imagining pre-marriage, or even, I guess, current Peter Parker, and think it's interesting. I don't usually think of this. I usually think of, like, you generally should have the same kind of behaviors towards anybody in a relationship, the right set of behaviors. But it's interesting. Those are characters who this would be a genuinely unhealthy relationship for. And in this case, it just kind of works because you have the supremely confident and competent person on one side and the emotionally confident guy on the other. Right,
because of course Peter Parker would be shattered by any woman talking down to him or making fun of him because he has such low self-esteem as a young man and as someone who is constantly belittled by the people he saves. And Bruce Wayne is terrible with women.
Traumatized.
He's traumatized, indeed, but he's a playboy in his own right where he's charming, but any woman that would probably give him enough sass that isn't Catwoman would probably ruin him in a very real way.
It is funny though how we see that dynamic with Catwoman happen a lot, and he does display a lot of those similar qualities of like, I loved I loved in Dark Knight Rises where he corrects her pronunciation of Ibiza, like he's just like, oh, you think you're all that cool, and he just kind of throws it right back at her without being mean spirited or harmful, but kind of shows her that he can dish it right back
in a matter of fact way, as opposed to rubbing it in.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder if that's because the two of them are both equally damaged in their own right. Catwoman has a very rough past, depending on which origin you go with, but usually she has a very rough past as a person in general, and coming through that terrible area, she's gone to crime, whereas Bruce had an extremely privileged upbringing, and he goes to fight crime. And I wonder if it's because they kind of understand each other on a level wherein they've had kind of a rough time, they work, versus Lois and Clark it is, you're really good at what you do, and I'm really good at allowing you to kind of do what you do and not take it personally.
Yeah, I think with Batman and Catwoman, what we really see there is, I think there's definitely a respect for her on his part. And I think he realizes that even though, of course, he did have the trauma of his parents dying, he knows on some level that a lot of what he does, he is able to do because he's a billionaire. And he has, like all this equipment being built for him. And Catwoman's she's a scrapper. She's kind of done it all on her own. So I think there's a respect of like, oh, wow, this is a woman who could potentially be my equal. Unfortunately, she's on the wrong side of the law, but I respect her for her abilities. And I think that's part of the reason why, at the end of Dark Knight Rises, they end up together, because what she really wants is, she's after the clean slate app. And he's like, okay, here's a person who's really ready for redemption. And that gives him some respect for her that I think he wouldn't have had otherwise.
I think you're right. Matt, do you have any other points you want to go over? I mean, you read through it. You read through most of it pretty recently, more so than me. I didn't know if you saw anything that jumped out at you other than those two instances.
I mean, most of the stuff that I saw and took notes on were additional points of support for essentially what we've already discussed, that I initially read it as this immature and toxic relationship that has become poisoned because of the secret that's kept and the behaviors that it winds up domino causing. But now we've got a great point that it's maybe not healthy but coped with, I suppose.
I think it kind of depends on the phase of the dating that they're in, because if they're just going on a few dates and things are on and off, I kind of don't blame Clark for not necessarily trusting her with his secret. But over time, if they're actually going to have a foundation for a healthy relationship, then obviously she needs to know. And of course, this is something that we discussed a little bit right before the call, is that at the end of Man of Steel, it's kind of implied that she's figured it out. And, when you can really trust someone with your secrets, then you can really expect them to have your back, and you have this sort of united front, almost like it's you and me against the world kind of thing. And you have someone who's really on your team. Over time, that secret is going to create a rift in their intimacy. And, it's one of those things like, oh, my boyfriend has an alter ego persona. He just disappears at times and I don't know where he goes. Anything that you have to lie about, even if it's not cheating, is going to be toxic and create that rift. But it sounds to me like if they're just dating and they're kind of on and off, then it's understandable that they're not really there yet. And what Clark needs to do is he just needs to decide if he can trust her or not. And if he can't, then that's not the greatest relationship for him to be in. So he's gotta make that decision at some point.
And I wonder, the more we talk about this, the more it kind of solidifies the idea to me that Lois and Clark are the parents of the DC pantheon. They are usually considered to be the relationship that works the best, that people always see. The other characters date or have spouses. I mean, the Atom gets divorced. It was Hal Jordan and Carol Ferris don't really do very well together, even though they are really attracted to each other. It kind of burns itself out. But the relationships that seem to work the best are the ones that are based on solid foundations, and Lois and Clark are the epitome of that for the DC Justice League. It's always funny when Clark talks about having to do relationship things with Lois, like have a conversation or he had an argument with her, and Bruce just doesn't understand it. Just kind of flies over his head. Or him and Barry Allen can kind of commiserate because they're both married to reporters who are women and are very good at their jobs. And it's kind of funny seeing the two of them have those moments where it's like, I gotta go home, it's dinner time.
Oh, yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. That's very, very interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
So some of the stuff we talked about, mainly between like the intimacy issues, the trust issues, is that something that you're seeing, obviously, now in your own work, so that you can draw from, and you have some examples to draw from, or is this just something you can extrapolate off of the stuff we've told you?
Oh, I mean, I see it in culture. I see it in the media. Over the summer we had that huge Ashley Madison hack, which in my world, that was like, that was like the shot heard around the world. Is, you have a bunch of hackers publishing the personal information of everyone who had a profile on this site that was designed for cheating. And then, you had these sites coming up where it was like, oh, enter your husband's email address and see if his was in the database. Did your husband have an Ashley Madison account? And, that's something that can be as much of a secret, of just like, oh, I'm not getting a need met, so I'm going to look for something outside the relationship. Or, it can be about cheating. It can be about something about your identity that you're afraid to reveal, something about your sexuality. I see that all the time. And it's one of those things where, I mean, man, I put everything out there about myself and the world. I'm so very open about who I am in a way that most people are very private about. And one of the reasons I do that is I'm kind of like, look, I don't want to have to wait to bring this up. I don't want to. If you're not into what I am, then that's fine. So Google me before a first date, and then figure it out.
Nice. It's an interesting little story idea that just popped into my head. The list of registered heroes gets leaked, and some superhero out there hasn't told his wife that he's actually a superhero, and having
oh my
that
god,
conversation.
That's brilliant! That's brilliant.
She thinks he's been cheating on her this whole time. He's like, no. Remember that earthquake in like Beirut like 2 months ago? I wasn't on a business trip. I was doing a relief effort with my telekinetic powers.
Right, or she thinks that he's cheating and then finds out he's actually a superhero, right?
Or even better, she spent like years accepting the fact that he's cheating. And she's just, okay, I've resigned myself. This is how my life is. And suddenly that moment of, wait, what?
Like they've got kids and she's like, I don't want a divorce because of the kids, and this is so much better. I'm less concerned now, and I'm so much happier. Or even like a guy thinks that he's in an open relationship with a girl, and he's like, oh, whenever she never comes over, I just assume she's with another guy, and really she's out, kicking ass and saving the world.
Yeah. And the way that could go from, oh, I'm so relieved, I'm so happy now, to like, oh shit, if he was just cheating on me, his life wouldn't be in danger. Like now I have to worry more when he leaves the house, not about the security of our relationship, but like, is he going to live? Is he going to survive this fight?
Mm-hmm.
And feeling that kind of powerlessness to be like, well, I'm just going to sit at home and hope he walks in the door. It's like having a husband who's a policeman or a firefighter or any other kind of dangerous profession, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even aside from like necessarily the fear, like there's also suddenly the secret's in the open, which means it needs to be discussed. Having to actually confront and talk through something like that, instead of it being, okay, I know he's a superhero, but I'm not going to talk about it. That, I guess, having the courage to actually talk it through. How are we as a family, as partners, going to cope with this? What are the rules? When do you need to call me? When do I need to call you if I'm in danger?
Do I have to be watching the news 24/7 to see if you're out saving the world, or can you at least shoot me a text when you're not going to be home?
Right, exactly. Yep.
Or even, I thought you've been cheating this whole time, and some of my needs as in a relationship haven't been met, intimacy or just personal needs that haven't been met. Can you at least stop saving the world for like 2 nights a week so we can just have dinner together?
And you know what that really reminds me of a lot is, it reminds me a lot of Edward Snowden. When you think about the fact that he most likely, by all accounts, didn't tell his girlfriend what he was planning to do until he was already pretty much leaving the country, and imagine being in that relationship and having that level of trust where it's like, all right, I may be destroying everything, I may be destroying, I'm probably not going to be allowed back into the US as a free man. So, and having that foresight and going ahead and like keeping that secret and then doing it and then having this relationship that now has to be long distance or whatever. I don't know if they're actually, I don't know if they actually met up, they're together or whatever, but as I understand it, they're still together as a couple. I don't know where she's living, and obviously nobody knows where he's living, but imagine having like that kind of bravery and that kind of caring about the world to be like, my mission is so important that as much as I love my partner and as much as I want to be with this person, I really need to save the world. I mean, it's like, we're seeing this like in real life, heroes do exist.
I didn't know that he hadn't talked that through with his girlfriend before doing it.
I don't know for sure, but the way that I understand it, if I remember what I read at the time, it was either very last minute or like he left a note and said, I'm really sorry I had to do this. Yeah.
P.S. I'm setting the intelligence community on fire. I'll be home maybe never.
Yeah, exactly. Because, you really don't have, again, it comes down to that trust issue. It comes down to like, well, this is something I need to do. I can't tell anyone about it before I do it. And if he did tell her before he left, I mean, imagine if that was your partner. Like if that was someone I was with, I'd be like, oh my God, how could you, like, why you? Why does this have to be you? Or why can't you do it anonymously? Or like, why are you sacrificing our relationship for this cause or whatever? Like, of course you wouldn't, I don't think anyone would see that far ahead. Like, you'd beg that person to stay and they'd have to look you in the eye and be like, I'm sorry, but saving the world is more important to me than you are, which
right.
That's a tough thing. But granted, like, the man has a ton of integrity, and now it's like, I don't envy the stresses that their relationship went through, but now she's literally dating a hero, It's kind of remarkable. Like, one day your boyfriend is just working for the government and the next day he's a hero, like an international hero. That's pretty intense.
Oh yeah, I imagine so. And I imagine it's the ability to take your ego out of the equation as the partner and say like, no, you're right, this is more important. And that's a rough thing to admit to yourself and say like, no, for them to be successful, I can't be in their way.
And it's tough. It's really tough, and I certainly haven't dated anyone who is quite on that heroic level, but I have dated people where it's like, yeah, no, I understand your work or your art or whatever your mission in the world comes first, and I totally get that. And one of the phrases I often say to some of my female students is, it's like, you can either date a busy man or you can date a broke man.
Yeah.
If you have someone who is doing amazing and worthwhile work in the world, you have to recognize that you might not always get your needs met all of the time, and you might have to have a good support circle. But the reward, the payoff in exchange for that is that you're with an incredibly amazing and self-actualized partner who's doing really important work.
So here's an interesting thing that came into my head. So Bruce would never even think to consult with whoever he's dating at the time.
Right.
Barry would probably bring it up, or at least try to, but feel really conflicted and eventually do it anyways.
Right, because, Iris is a reporter and good at her job.
Well, even aside from that, just he might bring it up and talk it through, but if there were some big decision, like, say, Flashpoint, he would do it with no matter what.
Going back in time and saving your mom from being killed.
Yeah, whereas Clark would talk it through with Lois, and they would make a decision as a couple.
Yeah, as a unit.
Yeah.
There are those very different relationships in comics, and of course we haven't gotten to them yet. In the Golden Age, it's very likely that we probably won't see those for a very long time, because the writing just wasn't there yet. It was more or less, let's sell these comics and have some fun for the kids. But it's very interesting seeing almost the groundwork being laid for that now. I mean, again, you don't see that with, my favorite hero, Green Lantern, has nowhere near those goods of relationships purely because he's a jerk. And he's a jerk, but he loves Carol and he loves the other women that he dates later in the comics, but at the end of the day, Hal is abrasive and a fly by the seat of his pants sort of guy, and Bruce is damaged and he's hard to get close to, and Clark is stable. He had two parents who were very lovely individuals that grew up in the Midwest in Kansas, and hardworking individual. He's good at his job. He respects women. He's the ultimate guy, but he's also chasing after his ultimate woman. So it's very obvious that they would be the perfect couple, which is so upsetting that right now he's with Wonder Woman. And that hurts me because I love Steve Trevor, who is traditionally Wonder Woman's boyfriend, and it's so much that it seems just such a cop-out of the Superwoman and the Superman are together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have feelings about the current state of DC.
It's specific character points with DC.
Doesn't everybody?
everyone does, and I'm in the outlier that I enjoyed how the reboot was done, but I can understand how some people are upset due to the way it was done. But there are certain character points that I'm not okay with or wish they hadn't done, and specifically one of them is the Superman Wonder Woman thing. I know my girlfriend is very not okay with it, purely just because she doesn't see Wonder Woman that way. It has nothing to do with the relationship. She just doesn't see Wonder Woman with anybody, I think.
That's interesting. I wonder why that is.
It should be interesting breaching that topic with her once we get to Wonder Woman and seeing what her justification is I just don't see Wonder Woman with anybody. And frankly, her being almost asexual makes sense.
Really? Huh. I'm definitely not as familiar, I'm sure, as many people, but I've always read so much kink into Wonder Woman because of the whole bondage aspect. And I think there was a piece where the creator came out and kind of, I don't know if it was a piece that was like a theory or if he admitted, but basically he put a lot of his bondage fetishes into the art of Wonder Woman, because there's so much rope in it and stuff. So I've always seen her as, I mean, I'm probably projecting here, but I've always seen her as an incredibly strong submissive,
That's an interesting take.
And I could see that, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the guy who wrote Wonder Woman and came up with her invented the polygraph, and was also a sexuality professor, and was in a three-way relationship with his wife as well as their mutual girlfriend. So he was a very early proponent for open sexuality and feminism. And for me, my take is her being asexual. She grew up on an island of just deep connection on a friendship and family level, with no external romanticism amongst the Amazons, at least that we've ever seen. And
that's true.
So in my idea, it's just she's never encountered a love relationship purely because everyone there is family, and it's all the same women for eternity.
Right, exactly. Which I guess would make you wonder: does she have any schema or any frame of even or without a frame of reference for that? Would she have feelings for someone if she met someone she was attracted to?
Or understand what attraction was?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it a nature or nurture thing? Right. And it's funny because they recently, when they did the reboot, they talked about how the Amazonians have more Amazons, and they changed her backstory a little bit, that instead of being born out of clay from Athena, like the traditional storyline is, she's the love child between Zeus and her mother Hippolyta. So she's effectively a demigod. And there's an issue where she goes into Hephaestus's forge and finds several dozen men, and she's like, who are these men? And he explains that they're male Amazons, and she thinks that he's enslaved male Amazonian soldiers, and he explains, no, they're here because of the female Amazons. And he goes into explaining that the women, every so many decades, capture or observe a ship that comes close to Themyscira, go on board, sleep with the sailors, then kill them. then go back to
like
Themyscira.
the sirens.
Right. Then they go back to Themyscira, have the children, any of them that are men, they give to Hephaestus to work his forges.
Oh,
and they keep the women.
Fascinating. Yeah.
And it's interesting because she kind of like tries to liberate them, and they're like, please don't hurt Hephaestus. He's effectively our father because the women cast us out.
Right. Yeah, he would be like their adoptive father, basically.
And who better than the lame god who has been cast out even by his own family to understand what it's like to be cast out?
Yeah, true.
It's just been interesting seeing those types of things, being played out. And again, the reason we got to Wonder Woman was, of course, her not being with Steve Trevor, which was almost the reverse of the traditional superhero relationship, which is the normal woman chasing after the Superman, and now you have the normal man chasing after the Superwoman. And that's all invalidated by having the ultimate Superman and the ultimate Superwoman be together. It almost makes their romanticism and their relationships weaker because it's just easy.
Well, that's interesting that you interpret easy as being weak. Do you mean a weaker relationship or
from a storytelling standpoint?
Yeah, I think that's more as it comes from. It's easy writing. It's easier writing than writing a more complex relationship between two individuals who are not on even footing, or at least not equal in certain respects. It's easy to write a Superman-Wonder Woman relationship because they're both really strong, they have no other conflict, they're effectively invulnerable, all they have is just their relationship.
That's true, but you know what? It's interesting because when you get rid of those kind of surface problems of the rifts in intimacy with the secret identity, or the, needing to support a partner who's vastly different from you, or whatever, it's kind of like you get rid of those problems and there's always another door, there's always, like, your princess is always in another castle. So it's like you're gonna see issues in their relationship come up, and it's going to be different than the issues that would come up in another relationship. And I would argue maybe that even makes it more difficult writing, because the writers are going to have to really delve into what it is that's like, rather than rely on the same sort of almost slapsticky comedic tropes of, she doesn't know my secret identity, and how am I going to sneak around and keep it from her,
Mm-hmm. And
so I would
be
interested to see how that plays out.
We'll have to see what we can do to kind of dig up some of that stuff, and maybe when we get to Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor, we'll have to have you back on, and we can talk about that some more at length and in detail.
That'd be a lot of fun. I one of the things that I wish I could do in the world is that for so many people who are writing relationship models for film and television and in comics, like, I wish that they would consult more relationship coaches so that they could write more models of healthy behavior. Even like the kind of dialogue or like active listening that you want to see in a healthy relationship. Because as you know, of course, like, we create these stories and then they repeat themselves in our culture. They're our own mythologies of our own day and age, and of course we see them play out on smaller scales everywhere. So I think I personally think this is a great idea, the kind of questions you're asking, and I'd love to see more of it.
Well, we really enjoyed this. This was fantastic to do, and we're really excited to do more episodes like this. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and talking Superman with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Indeed. And I had never considered this before. When we get to Wonder Woman, I'm going to try to read her as the ultimate sub, because I would have completely thought the other way around. So really interesting point there.
Yeah, and who knows? I don't know if I don't know if my read is correct either, but maybe that's just seeing a little bit of myself in her.
we'll do the research for you, and we'll try and find some points to support your theory there. And if it's there, we'll definitely share it with you.
Cool. That sounds like fun.
Arden, why don't you tell our listeners just again where they can find you so they can read up more on some of the stuff you have to say?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, my blog is Arden Leigh, ArdenLeigh.typepad.com, and both my Twitter and Instagram are at Arden Sirens, ArdenSirens, and the website for my coaching is seductionsirens.com.
Thank you all for listening to this special interview with Arden Leigh, and we hope to have her on again soon with some of our new features, and thank you again for listening.
DC Detectives can be found on iTunes and Stitcher.
To stay in the know, check out our Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr pages.
Visual aids, episode notes, and more can be found on DCDetectivespodcast.com. Arden was a lifesaver. What she pointed us towards was weird and unexpected, maybe. But the heart of comics' first couple was there. Two people who respected each other. The vacation was a wash, but at least the city felt a little brighter than when we got there. I'd booked the tickets, Joe would sleep off the celebration, and we'd be back in the office soon. Arden's insights on Lois and Clark's functionally dysfunctional relationship were rattling around my head, though. Something told me I need to keep that perspective in mind for the next case. That and maybe I should brush up on my Greek.